Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Today, we're diving into the Delhi Sultanate period,
Oh, yeah.
a really pivotal era in Indian history,
Definitely. It's huge.
spanning from 1206 to 1526 CE. So we're talking about a pretty substantial chunk of time here, and we're going beyond the textbook version and we're trying to dig into some of the more fascinating details using all these great scholarly works.
Lots to unpack.
So, like always, I've got my stack of books here ready to go.
Mm.
I'm really excited to see what kind of aha moments we might discover that you don't always get in a typical history class.
I think we're going to find some good stuff. The Delhi Sultanate is so interesting because it really transformed the political and cultural scene in India. It's a time when you see new forms of governing emerging, cultural encounters sparking all this artistic innovation and societal norms being totally upended and reshaped.
So it wasn't just like, oh, hey, new ruler, same old, same old. It sounds like a complete system overhaul.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you give us a little context? Like, what was India like before the Sultanate came to power?
Before the Delhi Sultanate, North India was mainly a bunch of Rajput kingdoms. They were powerful, sure, but they didn't have that same centralized authority that the Sultanate would bring in. So when Islamic rule came into play under the Sultanate, it really just flipped the political landscape on its head.
What would you say were the biggest shakeups from that power shift? Going from the Rajput kingdoms to the Sultanate.
Well, for one, the Sultanate established a standing army.
Oh, wow.
They set up a way more complex revenue system,
Right.
like land taxes and stuff.
I see.
And they were actually pretty clever about it. They brought the local Rajput lords into their administrative hierarchy.
Smart move.
Yeah,
Keep your friends close and all that.
right.
But even so, I bet there were still some power struggles going on.
Oh, definitely. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but incorporating those local lords helped maintain a certain level of stability.
That makes sense. So you mentioned a revenue system.
Hmm.
Anything specific stand out? Like a particular tax or method that was really important?
Yeah, so there was this tax called the Kharaj.
Kharaj.
Kharaj, yeah. It was levied on non-Muslims, and it ended up being a big source of money for the Sultanate, but it also played a role in shaping social relations at the time. It's really a complex system,
Yeah, I can imagine.
but it definitely helped the Sultanate manage all their resources.
That makes sense. And to really make their mark, the sultans went all out on some pretty impressive architecture,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
like the Quwwat-ul-Islam Mosque in Delhi, which was not just a mosque, right?
No.
It was a big statement about their power.
Absolutely, it was a show of force. And you know what's so cool about that mosque? It reflects the cultural fusion that was happening. Like, they incorporated Indian building techniques, the post and lintel system,
I've heard of that.
but then also included those classic Islamic architectural features, like the arches and domes. And this blend of styles wasn't just limited to Delhi. We see it in mosques all over the place, giving the Sultanate its own unique architectural fingerprint.
So even the buildings themselves were telling the story of these two cultures coming together,
Exactly.
each one adding their own unique flavor.
Yeah.
And this cultural fusion wasn't just in the architecture.
Definitely not. Think about the Persian language and literature. That got a huge boost during this era.
Okay, yeah.
And ultimately, that led to the development of Urdu, which is still spoken today.
It's amazing how languages evolve like that.
It is. And the Sultanate was big on patronizing the arts. We see this amazing mix of Islamic and Indian artistic traditions, leading to some really beautiful and unique pieces.
So it's like this cultural shift impacted everything,
Yeah.
from big things like architecture to the everyday lives of people. What were some of the major changes regular people were experiencing?
It's tricky because the social changes were kind of all over the place. Some Hindu temples got destroyed.
Yeah. Obviously, that reflects the religious tension at the time.
Definitely.
But at the same time, the Sultanate brought new economic opportunities. Trade routes were flourishing, especially routes like the Grand Trunk Road.
I've heard of that one.
Yeah. And new cities were popping up, attracting merchants and artisans from all different regions.
Just even with the conflicts, there was this chance for people to improve their lives, find new work and all that. Did any new professions come out of this economic growth?
Oh, yeah, definitely. With the Sultanate's focus on trade and all the new infrastructure, professions like money changers became a thing. They were crucial for trade transactions.
Interesting.
Plus, you had all these skilled artisans who were in high demand in the growing cities. We even see evidence of social mobility, especially among merchants and traders who had a chance to gain wealth and status.
So it wasn't all doom and gloom. There were definitely some silver linings in all this. And then on top of everything else, we see Sufism starting to become more prominent. What was the role of Sufism during this time? Sufism, with its focus on personal experience and a mystical approach to Islam, often went beyond the religious lines. Sufi saints and their teachings drew followers from different faiths, creating a more inclusive spiritual atmosphere.
It kind of reminds me how even in times of upheaval, people still find ways to connect on a spiritual level.
For sure.
We often forget that. And speaking of cultural fusion, there's this mosque built in Ayodhya in 1528-29.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's incredible because they used carved black stone columns that were actually taken from an older Hindu temple.
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
It is.
The mosque represents both the destruction and the fusion that went on during the Sultanate period. It reminds us that history isn't black and white.
Yeah.
It's all these shades of gray, conflict, adaptation, and cultural exchange all mixed together.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what would you say are the biggest takeaways about the Delhi Sultanate's lasting impact on India? What are the things we still see today that echo back to that time?
Well, there are so many. The Delhi Sultanate's legacy is woven into the fabric of India, politically and culturally. We can see its influence everywhere, even today, from administrative systems to the architecture. It's really quite remarkable.
You mentioned before how the Sultanate kind of integrated existing power structures into their rule. How did that actually work on the ground? Like, did they just take the Rajput kingdom's administrative systems and make them their own, or did they create something totally new?
It was a bit of both, really. They took some elements of what was already there, but added their own twists, new structures and practices. For example, village councils. They kept those around. Those had been important for local governance for ages, but they also brought in this whole hierarchical system of officials that answered directly to the Sultanate.
Okay, so they found a balance between central control and giving some power back to the locals. I bet that was tricky to manage.
Oh, for sure. But it was necessary for things to run smoothly. What about their economic policies? You've got to manage a vast territory like that, right?
Yeah, that's a lot of resources to handle. How do they do it?
Well, the Sultanate was very much an agrarian society, but they knew trade was key, so they came up with policies to encourage it. They standardized weights and measures, which was huge for merchants, and invested heavily in infrastructure, roads, irrigation systems, that sort of thing.
Practical stuff. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Like, think about the Grand Trunk Road. That was a major trade route, and they put a lot of effort into expanding it, connecting all the different parts of the Sultanate.
Wow. Talk about a long-term vision. But ruling such a massive and diverse area must have come with its own set of headaches. What were some of the biggest obstacles they faced?
Well, keeping everything stable and under control was a constant battle, that's for sure. Rebellions were always popping up, either from ambitious nobles within the Sultanate or from outside forces trying to take advantage of any weakness they could find.
So threats from both inside and out.
Yeah.
Sounds stressful.
You could say that. Like the Mongol Empire, under leaders like Genghis Khan and Timur, they were a constant threat to the Sultanate's northwestern borders. Keeping them at bay was a top priority.
Yikes. With all these challenges, how did the sultans maintain their authority? Was it all about military might?
Military power was definitely important, no doubt about it, but they also used cultural influence and symbolism to legitimize their rule. Think about all those grand mosques, palaces, and tombs they built. Those weren't just functional buildings. They were meant to project power and wealth, to remind everyone who was in charge.
We've talked about the mosques a lot, but what about the palaces? What can they tell us about life in the Sultanate court?
The palaces were the heart of it all. They were bustling centers of power and culture. Not just the Sultan and his family lived there, but also all these courtiers, officials, and servants. And architecturally, they're fascinating. You see this beautiful blend of Indian and Persian traditions, which perfectly reflects the Sultanate's hybrid cultural identity.
That cultural mix is just so fascinating. It pops up everywhere, from the buildings to the language and even to the religious practices. But we have to remember the Sultanate lasted for centuries. Life for the average person must have gone through some major ups and downs depending on where they lived, their social status, and which dynasty was in power at the time, right?
Absolutely. The Delhi Sultanate wasn't the static thing. It went through phases of stability and growth, but also periods of conflict and hardship. Take Muhammad bin Tughlaq, for instance. He ruled in the 14th century, and he had these really ambitious policies. I mean, his heart was in the right place. He wanted to make the Sultanate stronger, but some of his reforms backfired spectacularly.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, they caused some pretty serious economic instability and made a lot of people unhappy. It definitely weakened the Sultanate's control over things.
A classic example of Good intentions not always leading to good results. And especially when you're dealing with a massive empire like that, one wrong move can have a ripple effect, right?
Exactly. So yes, the Sultanate was constantly evolving, trying to adapt to pressures both internally and from outside. How did they manage to hold everything together amidst all that change?
It's a good question.
It is. What was their secret?
One key factor was their ability to create a new hybrid identity by blending all these different cultural elements. They didn't just impose their own culture, they incorporated bits and pieces of existing Indian traditions and mixed them with Persian and Islamic influences.
So they built a sense of unity through this shared cultural language that went beyond the old boundaries. But I'm guessing that wasn't always an easy process.
Oh, definitely not. There were bumps along the way for sure, conflicts and tensions. But being able to navigate those challenges and create this new cultural synthesis, I think that's one of the most remarkable things about the Delhi Sultanate. It shows how cultural exchange, even when it's messy and unpredictable, can spark some incredible creativity and innovation. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the rise of the Sultanate to its impact on India. But there's one big question we haven't tackled yet. What brought this mighty empire down? What led to its decline and eventual collapse?
Ah, yes. The fall of an empire.
Yeah, it's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? The rise and fall of empires, the shifting tides of power.
It really is. And the Delhi Sultanate's decline, well, it's not a simple story. It wasn't one big dramatic event that brought it down. It was more like a bunch of internal issues and external forces all coming together to weaken it over time.
Let's unpack those internal challenges first. What were some of the things that were brewing within the Sultanate itself?
Well, one ongoing problem was the struggle for power among the elites. We talked about those 5 dynasties, remember?
Yeah, the Mamluks, the Khaljis, the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids, and the Lodis.
Right. Each one contributed to the Sultanate's history, but there is also a lot of rivalry and instability between them. Ambitious nobles would challenge the Sultan's authority, which led to all these rebellions and power struggles. And that kind of constant infighting, it really weakens the central government.
So the seeds of instability were there from the very beginning, almost built into the system. Was there a particular event or ruler that really accelerated this decline?
Well, Muhammad bin Tughlaq's reign in the 14th century is a good example. He was a really ambitious ruler. He wanted to make some big changes. But some of his reforms, even though they were meant to help, actually ended up making things worse.
Oh, no. What kind of reforms are we talking about?
He tried to introduce a new currency system, which didn't go over well, and he shifted the capital, which caused all sorts of logistical problems and unrest. And the thing is, these weren't bad ideas in theory.
Yeah, I can see how that would be tricky.
It's just sometimes even with the best intentions, things can go wrong, you know? Especially when you're ruling a massive empire like the Delhi Sultanate.
It makes you realize how much responsibility those sultans had. One wrong move could have huge consequences. But I imagine internal struggles alone wouldn't have been enough to completely dismantle the Sultanate. What about those external pressures? What was happening outside their borders?
Well, by the late 15th and early 16th centuries, new powers were popping up in the region, and they had their eyes on the Sultanate's territory. Remember the Timurid invasion? Timur was a Central Asian conqueror, a real force to be reckoned with.
Oh yeah, he sacked Delhi in the late 14th century, didn't he?
That's right. That invasion really weakened the Sultanate's authority. It showed everyone that they weren't invincible, and that emboldened other rivals.
There's like a domino effect. One crack in the armor, and others are quick to exploit it. Was there one decisive blow that finally brought the Sultanate to its knees?
You could say that the rise of the Mughals was the final nail in the coffin. Babur, who came from a long line of conquerors, saw a chance to grab power.
Babur, the same guy who admired the Sultanate's architecture and gardens? It's almost ironic.
It is, isn't it? He appreciated their culture, but he was also a brilliant military strategist. He defeated the Lodis, the last of the Delhi Sultanate dynasties, at the First Battle of Panipat in 1526.
And that was basically the end of the line for the Delhi Sultanate.
Pretty much. Babur's victory marked the beginning of Mughal rule in India. It's fascinating how history unfolds, isn't it? Sometimes admiration and ambition can coexist.
It certainly makes you think. This has been a truly incredible journey through the rise and fall of the Delhi Sultanate.
Yeah.
What would you say are the most important things we've learned? What should our listeners take away from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the Delhi Sultanate, even though it eventually collapsed, left a profound legacy on India. Politically, culturally, socially, it's all there. It's a perfect example of how dynamic and complex Indian history is. This incredible blend of cultures, the struggles of ruling such a diverse land, and the constant shifts in power.
And it's a story of resilience. We can still see the echoes of the Sultanate in India today. The architecture, the languages, the administrative systems, it's all a testament to their enduring impact. It's a reminder that the past isn't just something we read about in books. It shapes our present in so many ways.
Exactly. And as you continue exploring history, I'd like you to consider this. What if the Delhi Sultanate had managed to overcome all those challenges? What if they had held on to power? How would India be different today? It's a thought-provoking question, and it shows how important it is to understand the forces that shape our world, both in the past and the present.
That's a great question to leave our listeners with. It reminds us that history isn't just dates and names. It's a web of choices and consequences and legacies that continue to influence us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Delhi Sultanate. Until next time, keep exploring.